Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's very nice to be here. It's lovely to have a nice breakfast included as well. This morning I'm going to share something of a personal story, something of how I came to faith, and particularly how I found myself being a vicar, which I definitely wouldn't have predicted some years ago. And I hope to leave space for questions. I realise it's a fairly risky business, asking someone to come and speak about themselves, especially a vicar, who I think, sadly, do quite like the sounds of their own voices and go on and on. But I shall try to be careful and keep to time. And I realise that I will say some things which invite wanting to ask a little bit more. And if you're interested, you can ask a little bit more, and if you're not, then that's fine. So there you are. And my hope is not just that you'll learn more about me, but that in hearing something of my story, you will see something of the way that God has worked in my life, and that it would be wonderful if you thought, oh, wow, that's pretty amazing, praise God. Or even better, that you might think, do you know, I've seen that sort of thing actually in my life as well, or could do. And that would be an encouragement to you in that way. Firstly, give me a very big overview. So I was born in London. I'm an only child. My parents were not particularly well off, but they sent me to a very prestigious school, Westminster School. As a lot of people did from that kind of a school, I went off to Posh University, went to Oxford, where I studied maths. I became a Christian at university about the age of 20 or so. After my 4 years of study, I went to work in a church as a kind of intern for 2 years before becoming a maths teacher at an independent school. And it was from there I put myself forward for ordination and became a Church of England minister. It was a slightly complicated process. It took a few years. But I was training for ministry in London, and that's where I got married during that time, at about 30 or so. My first post was in Stevenage. My second, as the vicar, is in Prudhoe, and I've just had my first child at about the age of 40 or so. So that's a kind of quick sweep. I genuinely will answer questions on anything, and I hope there will be some things that intrigue you. But throughout all that I'm going to say, because I could focus on a whole range of different aspects of how God has worked in my life, throughout what I'm going to say, the thing I'm kind of thinking of and focusing on is about the wisdom of God, kind of in contrast to the wisdom of this world, of man or of me. And there's this passage in 1 Corinthians which says this: "The message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but for us who are being saved, it's the power of God. For it's written in the Old Testament, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. So where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him. But God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe." And it's been my experience that time and time again, God's wisdom about, in many ways, big things, things that I value or my priorities or decisions that I make, the wisdom of God has been quite different to my wisdom, and I'm going to tell the story of how he's changed me over time. And that's where I hope that maybe you might see some parallels to things that you've learnt or are in the process of thinking through. So I'm going to start with maths. I love maths. I'm dyslexic, so I'm great with numbers and certain kind of logical ways of thinking and problem solving and so on. And I'm bad with words, particularly reading and writing. I was very, very late in my development to pick up those skills, and don't really enjoy them and still find them hard work. I loved getting to A-levels when I could finally stop doing all those subjects that involved that kind of essay writing and reading and all that kind of thing. And I did, for A-levels, I did double maths and physics and design and technology because I love to make stuff and I love working with wood. Even up to that point, I never had to revise maths. If I understood how something worked, I could just do it. Once someone showed me something, that was it. I could follow it through. And naturally, I just found maths very easy. I went to Oxford to do maths, and I did straight maths, and didn't really do the applied things so much, which was a great decision. I absolutely loved it. So at school, I found that my maths made me easily quite good at physics and chemistry and other things. Your maths can kind of carry you through certain things. And I could have then studied something that was kind of applied maths. I didn't, I just had games with numbers and theoretical stuff. And that was a great decision because I absolutely loved it. So if this means anything to you, I love rings, fields, algebra, analysis, that kind of pure maths side of things. And if anything, if that does mean something to you, it's that sense of the beauty, the neatness. You know, in that world of maths, everything works absolutely. It's not messy. It's perfect and it fits. There's an appeal to that, isn't it? The world is not messy in the world of maths. Later, when I was a maths teacher, it was really the further maths, the harder the maths was, the more I enjoyed it. And I loved working with the kids on that sort of thing. Along with that human element of understanding why people couldn't understand something and then trying to help them past it and through it. And I had some bad maths teachers in my time, and I thought, I can do better than that. So that maths carried me through a lot of other things in my education. And I loved being a maths teacher and was reasonably good at it because I could do that thing of understanding why someone didn't get it and help to talk them through so that they could understand the reasons behind it and then reproduce it for themselves, which is why I loved, obviously. That can be harder for some and easy for others, but I enjoyed it. And I still love maths, and I still love doing puzzles. I still do, maths puzzles in a book on the train, that's me. I really, really enjoy it. And honestly, as a schoolboy, I thought that God was a lie, that it was just not logical to believe in God, that was the kind of thing that people who were not rational and maybe were over-emotional would believe, because they wouldn't make their decisions primarily based on evidence, but on feelings. Now, I think that that's wrong, and I was wrong, but that's how I thought. And some vitally important moments on a journey to changing my mind was a guy who challenged me. It was called Al Horn, and he was a Christian minister. And he said, I think he was actually pretty frustrated with me for being arrogant. And he said, look, if you're so sure, persuade me. And of course I couldn't. And what happened in my mind is I went from being 100% sure that there was no God to being 99.9% sure that there was no God. I still thought I was right. But I thought, there is a tiny possibility that I'm wrong. And that changed the way that I listened and it changed the way that I thought. Because up to that point, I really did think it was a 100% chance that I was right. And so I didn't listen really properly at all. So that was very important. Also, very important for me was going to Oxford and meeting intelligent people who were Christians. That didn't fit with my stereotype, of course, because there were intelligent people who had thought things through, who could answer some of the questions which I had, who did believe in God. And that helped me, but also challenged, again, my wrong stereotype of what the Christian faith was all about. And also important was the realization that in many ways the Christian claim and your way of assessing it was a historical claim, not a mathematical claim. In the sense that deciding the right question to ask is, who was Jesus? And if you like, from a logical, mathematical point of view, if you look into it and decide that he was the Son of God, well then you've got God, QED. And so the way to ask the question is a historical approach to look at the eyewitnesses and the evidence and so on and work out who you think Jesus was. That was very helpful for me in changing my approach, if you like, my thinking. So I did become a Christian. So remarkably, when I was a teacher, and I love being a maths teacher, don't get me wrong, I left maths teaching to go into being a vicar, which, if you like, is spiritual teaching. And the reason I did that was because I thought it was more important in that kind of eternal sense. So even in school, I volunteered to take chapel services, so I would lead the service and preach. I would run those lunchtime Christian clubs, and even evangelistic ones, where people could come and ask their difficult questions and be just like I was when I was their age. And I loved doing those things and wanted to try and make time in my diary to be able to do that. And in one sense, in going forward for ordination, I was saying I want to make even more time in my diary to do that. Because maths can help you navigate this world and make sense of it and enjoy it. And Jesus can help you navigate this world and eternity and make sense of it and enjoy it. And so that's maths. Next up, investment banking. Now, I don't know if this will make you laugh, but it shows my cheeky side. My dad and I used to have a bit of a laugh and kind of throw ourselves into April Fool's Day. He began really by doing this when I was young, and I have to say he didn't set his sights too high. He would say things like, I grew up in London, he would point out of the window and say, "Look, a red squirrel." And of course it was a grey squirrel, because there are loads of those in London. And I would look and he'd say, "Ha, April Fool," which was not setting the bar very high. I then kind of raised the bar a little bit, two particularly amusing ones. When I was at university and my parents were up visiting me for a weekend, and it was April Fool's Day as it happens, I phoned them early in the morning while they were still having their breakfast and told them about the flood that was happening in the basement and how I wouldn't be able to come and meet them today because we were there with saucepans throwing water up out of the window. And I believe that my mum found it slightly distressing and woke up in a bit quicker than she otherwise would and told me not to do things like that again. Only for a couple of years later, for me, again, I think you're supposed to do it before lunchtime, aren't you? That's the thing. So I phoned them up in the morning to talk to them about the job interview that I'd had. It was for a very large investment bank. It was one of those jobs where you work really long hours, very, very hard working, maybe for the first 3 or 4 years. It's extremely competitive with a large pool of people, but if you're one of the ones who makes it, well then the future prospects, and particularly the salary, is huge. And that I really felt like the sacrifice at this point was worth it, and that they had offered me the job, which was in New York, and I was minded that I was going to take it. And of course they were quite distressed, particularly at the thought of New York, really. And after that one I was told I was not allowed to do that sort of thing anymore. And that April Fool's Day was off the menu. Now, it was funny, partly because it was very believable. This was at the point where I'd finished doing kind of an internship at the church, and just before I went and got a job as a teacher, and I was deciding about career, and I think they knew that I'd thought about going into banking or investment banking particularly in the past, that some of my skills were suited to it, and that I could get that kind of a job. And actually that before I became a Christian, my ambition was to be very rich, and to have the kind of lifestyle that money can bring. It brings you security and freedom, and I wanted it, quite a lot of it. But when I became a Christian, that changed. It was changed slowly. I think one of the hardest things for God to change about me was generosity. I'd grown up when in our family money was short, and to go to this posh school I was surrounded by a lot of people who had quite a lot of money when we couldn't afford to go on holidays and so on, even things like how much money people had in school to buy their sweets at the tuck shop. became a very obvious difference between me and those around me. So I'd grown up being careful with money and always being good at saving. And so it was hard, I still find it hard to some extent to be generous, because my mindset is got to keep it and need more and those sorts of things. And God did change me, and I think he changed me in two main ways within me. One was the thought that having a lot of money brought with it a kind of status and value and importance that actually I was ambitious to have for myself, because I wanted that kind of importance. Well, he changed my thinking on that. In fact, as a teacher, after only 3 years in teaching, I was earning £30,000 or so a year. I'm never going to earn that much as a vicar, no matter how many years of experience I have. And the second thing was, I learned to live my life with principles, with integrity, one of which for me was taking on a motto, start as you mean to go on, which might sound like, how does this fit in? Well, it's relevant here because if you think particularly of that picture I painted of the investment banking trainee, and actually what that workplace demands of you is a massive sacrifice for a couple of years as you fight it out to try and make it, with the promise that if you do, then you'll be able to kind of calm down a little bit and work not such long hours. In fact, they provide you with a gym at the office and beds at the office and so on, so that you never need to leave. They want their pound of flesh. And I took on this motto, start as you mean to go on, precisely thinking, well, if I'm not willing to live my life like that way onwards, then I shouldn't do it now, because who am I kidding? That I think that I'm just going to claw it back and stop working that much, or whatever the example may be. If I cross the line now, then I'll keep crossing it, was my thinking. So for me, being a vicar is getting to do the good stuff for God now, serving his kingdom and so on as my job, which is fantastic. And I love it, and it's valuable to me, and I'm starting as I mean to go on, as it were. So that's why investment banking isn't for me. Last thing to mention is football. So I'm an Arsenal fan. The good times are back, almost, and we're actually playing some good football again. So I grew up in London. Arsenal was the nearest club to me in any division, and I used to go along to Highbury to watch the matches. My mum used to take me because she wanted to do stuff that I enjoyed, and she took me along to the games. I even, when I was in Oxford, used to get the kind of late bus down from Oxford to London and go to those midweek Champions League games, and saw some of the best teams in Europe, and absolutely fantastic. I also used to play football, and play to a reasonably high standard. I was in my school team at Westminster, and a thing called the ISFA, the Independent Schools Football Association, which is kind of a scouting network that plucks the best players out of all the independent schools and brings them together to form a team. I made it into the B team of that level. And at one point it was a genuine dream that I might be a professional footballer. Obviously, I've already told you I wanted to be rich, but also for the enjoyment of the sport, and I love watching and playing football. It was unrealistic that I would ever make it to be a professional footballer. But I loved it, and I still love it. I even tried to join a football team for playing football when I got to Prudhoe. And I heard of this seniors team that was being started up, and I went along. They were seniors, but they were still all 18. And I was 35, and my knee couldn't take the hard work. But I mentioned football because I want to tell you that to me, being a vicar is more attractive than being a footballer, more enjoyable than being a footballer. And you can guess now why I would think that. I'm not fussed about the money. I'm interested in eternal life and helping people for eternity. But I still think it's worth addressing that question of fun. I imagine if you asked most people, they wouldn't say, oh yes, I think that being a vicar would be really fun. I think I could enjoy that. I would find it entertaining, satisfying, a kind of joyful satisfaction. And I have to be honest, I still love football. I love watching football. If I can look after my knee, I love playing football. But you realise that football, in our culture, really can become a kind of worship. In fact, more so in the northeast than other places that I've lived, it can be a kind of worship. There's that competition for Sunday mornings, isn't there? Will I take the kids along to football or go myself? Or am I interested in going to church? You might have noticed when you watch people on the TV screens that there is a bowing down to certain football, literally bowing down to certain footballers. And of course it's a gesture, which may be not strictly what people are communicating of worship, but it is a hint towards that way of thinking. And there's the singing chants in the stands of adoration and so on. And Newcastle United, the allegiance to, and if anything, defining yourself by your allegiance to Newcastle United is a kind of worship. And I want to say that for me, being a Christian is very similar to those things. And being a vicar is exactly the same thing, but maybe scaled back just a little bit. It's satisfying, it brings joy and fun. And I think of Jesus' words at the end of John 4. So the beginning of the chapter is the woman at the well. At the end of the chapter, he's speaking with his disciples. They're a bit confused. And it says this: his disciples urged him, "Rabbi, eat something." He said to them, "I have food to eat that you know nothing about." His disciples said to each other, "Could someone have brought him some food?" Jesus says, "My food is to do the will of him who sent me and to finish his work." And Jesus is saying to them, I find it satisfying, I find it nourishing to do the will of him who sent me, to do his work. And I think I experienced that in serving the Lord, in having, as a vicar, having all that time where I can serve the kingdom of God and serve the Lord, which in one sense is a direct competition to the love of football, in the sense that it brings joy and satisfaction, it's stimulating, it gets you going. And I would rather be a vicar than a professional footballer because of the joy that it brings. I love talking to people about God. I love helping people to be closer to him. I love helping people who are part of the church. I love helping people who are not part of the church. When I was younger, in many cases, the biggest ups and downs of my life went in line with Arsenal Football Club, with the goals that were scored, or the matches that were won, or even, because I was quite fortunate at that point, the trophies that were won. But now it's with the church growing or struggling, with praying with people or not, with seeing people suffer and struggle, with singing with my brothers and sisters, not on the terraces, but in church, in praise of God. Maths, investment banking, and football, all of which I'm happy to put to one side as I serve the Lord as a vicar. I have one last observation for you before I take any questions. In the wisdom of God, he has led me to be a vicar, and I don't find it easy in the terms of my natural gifting. My natural skills in maths, and with numbers and with logic and all that kind of stuff, are not that important and useful in being a vicar. My natural struggles with reading and writing are actually quite central to what I have to do as a vicar. Let me give you some specific examples. Sometimes I just don't want to open that email because I can see that it's going to be long and complicated. And what happens sometimes is I might kind of try to read through it and just not process what's there. I miss stuff, and people say to me, "Well, didn't you read this?" And I think, I don't really know. Did you? Oh, sorry. And I go back and I check, and sure enough, there it was. I just didn't notice. And reading books, theological books, commentaries, whatever it means, writing talks, it's hard work. I love standing up to speak because there are the people who I love and care for. I hate being in the study in front of the books, and it takes me much longer than it should. And yet, maths, I find easy, stimulating and quick. I didn't mention too much about it, but I was headhunted one summer during university to go to GCHQ and to be a part of one of their summer programs. It's basically a kind of internship thing they do to suck you in, to give you a taste for it so that maybe you might want to do that later in life. I got a first from Oxford, though eventually at university I had to do some actual revision and some work, but still I was able to get a first and didn't have to do that much work, not like other people might have done. I'm just naturally quite gifted. And I don't find that those skills are that applicable. So sometimes I might say, God, am I in the right place? This is so hard. Can you help me? And yet, I realise that in the wisdom of God, He has put me in a position where I do struggle slightly. And I need to depend on Him. I need to call out to Him. And He likes that. Because I don't feel proud and puffed up about how wonderfully talented I am to be able to do this thing that I'm doing. In fact, I would say every week there are points where I struggle. Think, am I ever going to get this finished? Where I need help and I call out to Him and I say, Lord, please help me to do a job that's good enough and to trust You with this. And He loves that. He loves that I depend on Him in that way. And I love that too. And I love my job. Thank you for listening.
I'm sure some people must have questions. John, please.
So you went from 100% to 99.9%.
Yep.
What was the thing that brought you to faith? How did you become a Christian? You mentioned
The one
you did,
thing.
but how did it happen? Who did you?
So, there's no simple answer to that. There was loads of things that were brought together. A big thing was there were people who were praying for me, quite a few of them, which I found out about later, which is great. A really big thing was that question, don't ask, is God there? Ask, who was Jesus? And if you answer the question, He wasn't the Son of God, then you can just chuck it out. And if He was the Son of God, then you've got the whole package. And in that sense, therefore, starting to look at the eyewitness accounts in the Gospels and to look at their historical reliability, to what extent can I trust this and so on. I did that kind of investigating, both in churches and church groups and on my own, separately reading things, researching and so on.
So you went on, even though you were sure, you still went along to a church?
Yeah, my mind was opened up a little bit to being willing to consider it. And I had some pushy friends who invited me to stuff quite a lot. The really interesting, so I think if I were to give you one answer, I would say the Holy Spirit opened my heart and opened my eyes. And a really interesting illustration of that was, I went along to a church before the 99% thing, and I know it's a great church where they will actually explain the gospel clearly, week by week. But what I heard when I was at the 100% sure it's wrong stage, every week I heard them saying, if you're a good person, God will like you, and He'll be pleased with you, and you'll be part of His family. If you're a really good person. And that's what it's all about, trying to be good. Which, of course, I know is not the gospel message at all. But that's what I heard, that's what I expected to hear. That's what I heard and didn't really like, didn't find it appealing or attractive and didn't want to know. And then after that, I listened a little bit more and I heard this message of grace, of actually it's what God has done for you. Yes, you're not good enough, but that isn't a get lost thing. That is a motivator to want to come to Him to receive. So in terms of the Spirit's work, that 99% thing was vital because I opened my ears and He opened my ears. That's part of the answer.
Malcolm first and then Don.
So why Prudhoe? Or Prudhoe? Prudhoe, it's correct.
My brother. I'll try and give you 3 short reasons. Again, it's always complicated, isn't it? Number 1 is in the north, which has 2 reasons attached to it. One is that my wife was born in Sunderland, and we wanted to come and live closer to her parents. going on the internet, isn't it? But not too close. Has that right balance of being nearby but not being in the next street. The second related to the north was, actually there was a national evangelist who challenged current and future ministers to consider coming north, because the reality of what was going on at the time is that there were vacancies in the north and no vacancies in the south, and vicars hanging around and 10 people applying for one job. Maybe it's an exaggeration, but that was the picture, that everyone was trying to, basically they were worldly, going where the money was, where the good schools were, and whatever it was. And I was thinking about gospel needs, not about comfort. And so with Sam and I said, well, we'll go north. Other people aren't willing to, we are, let's do it. So that was another thing. And then why Prudhoe? We, through friends of friends of friends, we heard about a vacancy in the Church of England in a parish somewhere near Morpeth. I wrote and said, I may be a bit interested in this, can you tell me about it? And the diocese wrote back and said, no, that's already gone. Here's 2 other job descriptions, one of which was Prudhoe. And we thought, oh, this one sounds like it could be good. And then came to visit and so on and so forth.
You wanted to be a missionary.
Say again?
You wanted to be a missionary.
To be a missionary to the frozen north.
Why are you an Anglican?
Good question. Oh, you're talking.
I'm a visualist, and I love, and I'm dyslexic like yourself. I was very good at arithmetic then, up to doing the ordinary level. I considered doing advanced level maths, but the first lesson I went to, the teacher went straight into calculus, which we'd never heard of. I didn't understand a word of what he said, and decided to take geography instead. Now, years later, when I was in the civil service as an architectural technician, I needed to pass some exams to join the staff. I went to a local college and you did building material, but you also did maths. And he went into calculus straight away. But he was a far better. I understood things from him I didn't understand before. And passed the exams to get onto this stuff, civil service. So I know where you were coming from. That's all I needed to say.
Yeah, and as an insight into me and the way that I think, when I hear that story and of you being kind of put off it, immediately I began to think, bad teacher, because you can explain calculus in a way that's visual and intriguing and actually makes sense. And if I say calculus, possibly more than half of you are thinking that's the complicated thing that we can't get our heads around. But it's really not. It's just a clever idea that leads you to a simple pattern that you can follow, and then that pattern can be generalized and used really well. And that's all it is. And if someone can show you how the pattern is sensible and makes sense, and you can follow it and use it for other stuff, you'll think, oh, that's really, how clever, we like that. And a good teacher can show you that and give you confidence in it. Sorry, it's sad, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you did geography.
I can still remember Simpson's rule,
Yeah.
where you're digging and putting a road in the undulating areas where you take the tops off hills and put it into and balance the lot. But I never had the use of it.
No.
Perhaps we should move on to...
Yes. So why the Church of England?
Yes,
why an Anglican?
Yeah. Have you experienced with other churches? Presumably you have. Well, the denominations, sorry, I didn't.
Yeah.
Well,
So that's two interesting questions actually. Have I experienced with other denominations? I was actually baptised into no, it was a sprinkling baptism into a thing called the New Church. If anyone's heard of Emanuel Swedenborg, it's a sect. And if you've never heard of it, you should think of them a bit like the Mormons. So that was the church that my mum went along to, basically because she thought that they were nice enough and she could cope with it. And when I later was converted and talked to my mum about faith, she came to wonderfully accept a more traditional and orthodox sort of a faith. But this church is so out there that my baptism in it was not recognised by the Church of England as a valid Trinitarian baptism, and I had to have a conditional baptism later on. That's by the by. So I had some experience in a sect. I think my conversion and my church experience at that crucial point in university was in an evangelical Anglican church in Oxford that did a great job of reaching students with the gospel. And so to some extent, why Church of England? Well, it's because that's how God called me to faith in the first place. But I think I would add to that kind of circumstantial side of it, a conviction side of it, which is everything that the Church of England has been built upon and stands for are things I'm passionate about. Now, the Church of England is extremely broad, and if you go to 2, 3, 4 different Church of England churches, you will see totally different patterns of worship and even beliefs behind those. But the things that stand behind the Church of England in terms of its formation are things that I passionately believe in and want to proclaim to the nation. And we were talking about this on our table, the idea that the mission of the church is to have that church presence in every small community, both for pastoral discipleship of Christians and also for outreach to non-Christians, is something that I think every Christian can get behind. And the Church of England does that really well. I could say more.
Do you think it's sustainable, that model? The parish?
The
parish model.
Is that your question?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know. Before I came to Newcastle Diocese, I was in St Albans Diocese, and the bishop there felt passionate about the way to grow the diocese and the church was to have ministers, as many as possible, and he resisted this scaling back of clergy numbers. In the Newcastle Diocese at the moment, those of you Anglicans might know, the policy is we're struggling for money, we're going to have to pull back clergy numbers. I think that is a way of increasing decline, not growing churches. And so if I had any of that kind of responsibility, which I really don't want and just don't want to get involved in, I would try to resist that in whatever way I can. I realise it's difficult, I don't have any answers. But if you like, I know what I believe would be a good idea. So the world around us has changed, and communities are no longer just physical communities. And actually, good functioning outreach and network churches and so on recognise that and function within communities that are not just geographical ones. Do I think that the parish model is sustainable? I think it could be, but I think that's above my pay grade. I love being the parish priest. I don't want any other responsibilities. I want to get on with what I'm doing. I want to know the people. I want to minister to the people. And I want to leave the structural decisions to someone else.
Anyone else?
Perhaps just a comment. I know one happened to be a Baptist, but he believed that if any kind of revival in the country, it would come via the Church of England because of the structure that you mentioned. That by its very nature, it's in the locality, it reaches in different ways, those who are ardent, those who are less.
We've got all the things ready, haven't we? Very suitable buildings,
Yes.
all over the place, which can fit lots of people. I think historically, often revival has come by someone leaving the Church of England in order to do their preaching, and then there was revival. But yeah, I don't really mind how it comes, I'm fine.
As long as it happens.
Yeah, that'd be great.
We're running out of time, so I should say thank you very much, Gary, for sharing.
If you would like to ask me other questions,
Yeah.
you can grab me afterwards.
Thank you very much.
That's a pleasure.
I think we'll all want to go to Dan's church on Sunday, April the 1st. Just to really smoke